September 17, 1943, 27,000 feet above Stuttgart, Germany. Hauptmann Klaus Hoffman squeezed the trigger of his Bf-109's cannon, watching his tracers arc toward the American B-17 bomber ahead. He had been trained to expect panic, evasive maneuvers, perhaps a quick spiral into the clouds. What he witnessed instead, through the crystal-clear autumn sky over the Rhine Valley, would shatter every assumption the Luftwaffe had drilled into him during 2 years of fighter training. The Flying Fortress didn't break formation, it didn't even flinch. And as his round struck home, 10 synchronized machine guns swiveled toward him like the eyes of an angry god. For Hauptmann Klaus Hoffman and the 2,847 Luftwaffe fighter pilots who engaged American heavy bombers between August 1942 and May 1945, the collision between expectation and reality began the moment they closed to firing range. Among them were 340 veteran pilots, men with Eastern Front experience, multiple kills against Soviet aircraft, whose encounters with American bombers would prove more psychologically devastating than any combat they had previously experienced. According to declassified documents from the Luftwaffe operations staff, preserved in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg, Germany, the first major engagement with USAAF B-17 formations occurred over Wilhelmshaven on January 27, 1943. German fighter commanders had prepared extensive tactical briefings based on intelligence assessments and experience fighting British bombers. The 280-page tactical manual, titled Bekämpfung der viermotorigen Bomber, or Fighting Four-Engine Bombers, Tactical Guidelines, dedicated 43 pages to attack angles, vulnerable zones, and psychological preparation for engaging heavy aircraft. What actually happened caught everyone off guard. Major Erwin Fleischer, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, stationed at Vitry and Artois, France, recorded in his combat diary, now housed at the Imperial War Museum in London, his first encounter with B-17 formations. January 28, 1943. Engaged the American Wehrmachts this afternoon. Expected the usual. Bombers breaking formation, seeking cloud cover, individual aircraft becoming separated and vulnerable. Instead, witnessed something extraordinary. Despite taking fire from 6 fighters simultaneously, the Americans maintained perfect formation. Their defensive fire was not wild or panicked. It was disciplined, coordinated, interlocking. We lost 3 aircraft in the first attack pass, 3, against bombers we were told would be easy prey. Lieutenant Baumer described it as flying into a wall of lead. It wasn't fear, it was confusion. The intelligence preparation Luftwaffe pilots received before engaging American bombers had painted a specific picture based on experience with Royal Air Force tactics and assumptions about American military capability. Intelligence reports from Luftwaffe Command, translated and catalogued as LC Report 09-1942 in the U.S. Air Force Historical Research Agency archives at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, included detailed assessments of American bomber tactics. According to these reports, American bomber crews were inexperienced, trained hastily, lacking the discipline of European military tradition. The reports emphasized that American material superiority cannot compensate for inferior training and tactical doctrine. Pilots were briefed that B-17s would scatter under determined attack, that crews would panic when fighters pressed home attacks, and that the bomber formations would break apart once casualties mounted. Yet here flew Hauptmann Hoffman, age 26, a veteran of the Battle of Britain and the Eastern Front with 17 confirmed kills, watching American formations absorb punishment that would have shattered any Soviet or British bomber stream he had ever engaged. The cognitive dissonance wasn't merely uncomfortable, it fundamentally challenged everything he understood about air combat. Lieutenant Franz Weber, assigned to Jagdgeschwader 1 in April 1943, described his first engagement with B-17s in a letter home that was later intercepted by Allied intelligence and preserved in the Combined Strategic Targets Committee archives at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Dear Father, today I experienced something that has shaken my confidence in our intelligence reports. We attacked a formation of 30 American bombers. We hit them hard. I personally saw 4 engines streaming smoke, observed direct strikes on fuselages, watched pieces fly off their aircraft. Yet they continued. They maintained formation. They completed their bomb run, and their return fire. Father, I have never experienced such volume of fire. It was not random. Every approach angle we attempted, they had guns covering it. We lost 6 aircraft, 6, to damaged bombers that should have been falling from the sky. How is this possible? The revelation of American tactical sophistication came in waves, each more psychologically jarring than the last. According to after-action reports from Luftwaffe fighter units, compiled by the Reich Air Ministry and captured by Allied forces in 1945, the initial assumptions about American bomber vulnerability collapsed within the first 3 months of sustained combat.
Dr. Heinrich Müller, a Luftwaffe flight surgeon assigned to analyze pilot combat stress at Jagdgeschwader 54's base at Oldenburg, maintained detailed medical and psychological case notes that were later donated to the Deutsches Museum in Munich. His entry from May 15, 1943, reveals the emerging psychological crisis. Examined 12 pilots who engaged American formations over the Ruhr yesterday. What disturbs me is not physical injury, but psychological state. Experienced pilots, men with 20-30 kills against Soviet aircraft, are exhibiting symptoms consistent with severe stress. Trembling hands, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite. When I asked Oberleutnant Reinhardt, an ace with 32 victories, what troubled him most, he said, "They don't break. No matter what we do to them, they don't break. It's like fighting machines, not men." This represents a fundamental challenge to pilot confidence. The contrast between expectation and reality extended beyond mere tactical surprise. Luftwaffe intelligence had constructed an entire narrative about American military capability that combat experience was systematically dismantling. This narrative, based on a combination of ideological assumptions and outdated intelligence, had convinced German pilots that American forces represented quantity without quality, industrial output without fighting spirit. Oberfeldwebel Karl Schmidt, stationed at Bad Aibling in Bavaria, recorded in his personal journal, preserved at the Bavarian State Archives, an entry from June 3, 1943, that captured this ideological collision. We were told Americans are soft, that their wealthy society produces men without stomach for real combat. Today I watched an American bomber with 2 engines on fire, half its tail shot away, still maintaining formation, still firing back, still pressing toward its target. The pilot could have turned back, could have bailed out. Instead, he stayed with his formation, completed his bomb run, then attempted to reach England. His aircraft broke apart over France. I saw 3 parachutes, 3 survivors from a crew of 10. They chose death over breaking formation. This is not the behavior of soft men. The combat mathematics told a brutal story that contradicted every intelligence estimate German planners had made. According to statistical analysis prepared by the Luftwaffe operations staff in July 1943 and declassified by the German Federal Archives in 1988, German fighters needed an average of 3.7 attack passes to down a Soviet bomber, 4.2 passes to down a British bomber, but 8.3 passes to down an American B-17. More troubling, the loss ratio. For every B-17 destroyed, Luftwaffe fighter units lost an average of 1.4 aircraft, an exchange rate that was strategically unsustainable. The defensive armament mathematics proved equally shocking. A technical intelligence report prepared by the Luftwaffe Testing Center at Rechlin in October 1943, captured intact by American forces in 1945 and archived at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, detailed the miscalculation. Previous estimates of B-17 defensive firepower significantly underestimated both volume and effectiveness. A standard B-17G carries 13 50 caliber machine guns. In formation, a combat box of 18 aircraft presents 234 heavy machine guns. combined cyclic fire rate exceeds 58,000 rounds per minute. No previous bomber formation in aviation history has approached this defensive capability. Lieutenant Otto Becker, Hoffman's wingman, described his first head-on attack against a B-17 formation in a combat report dated August 8, 1943, preserved in Jagdgeschwader 11's unit records at the German Air Force Museum in Berlin. Approached from 12 o'clock high as briefed, expected concentration of fire from nose guns only, instead encountered coordinated fire from nose, top turret, and ball turret positions. The Americans have calculated exact ranges and angles for overlapping fire. At 800 meters, I counted 7 distinct gun positions tracking my approach. This is not defensive fire. This is a precisely engineered killing zone. Broke off attack at 600 meters. Watched Unteroffizier Krause continue his pass. His aircraft disintegrated before reaching firing range. But perhaps the most psychologically destabilizing revelation concerned American industrial capacity and crew replacement rates. Luftwaffe intelligence estimates from 1942, based on peacetime American production capabilities, had vastly underestimated wartime mobilization potential. German analysts predicted American heavy bomber production of approximately 3,200 aircraft annually. The actual figure for 1943 was 9,615 B-17s and B-24s combined, according to War Production Board statistics archived at the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library in Hyde Park, New York. Major Fleischer recorded in his diary on September 14, 1943, an entry that captured the dawning horror of these numbers. This morning we celebrated shooting down 6 American bombers. 6 confirmed kills. Excellent work by any measure. This afternoon, intelligence briefing informed us tomorrow's raid will include 80 additional bombers that were not present last week. 80. We destroy 6. They add 80. The mathematics of this war have ceased to make sense. Or perhaps they make perfect sense, and that is what terrifies us. We are fighting a nation that can absorb our best efforts and grow stronger. How does one maintain morale when victory in combat produces strategic defeat? The crew training pipeline revealed similar disparities. Luftwaffe intelligence estimates from 1942, based on peacetime American production capabilities, had vastly underestimated wartime mobilization potential. German analysts predicted American heavy bomber production of approximately 3,200 aircraft annually. The actual figure for 1943 was 9,615 B-17s and B-24s combined, according to War Production Board statistics archived at the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library in Hyde Park, New York.
British Oberst Adolf Gallen, general of the fighter arm, synthesized these revelations in a memorandum to Reich Marshal Goering, dated November 24, 1943, declassified in 1971, and housed at the National Archives. The intelligence picture we constructed of American capability has proven catastrophically incorrect. We assumed industrial capacity without military competence. Combat reveals the opposite, a force that has transformed warfare into an engineering problem and solved it systematically. Their bomber formations represent not bravery or skill in traditional sense, but rather the application of mathematical principles to aerial warfare. They have calculated optimal formation geometry, defensive fire solutions, crew training protocols, and replacement rates. We are fighting equations, not men, equations we cannot match. Hauptmann Hoffman's personal experience mirrored this broader pattern of disillusionment. His sold book notes, acquired by the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in 1989 from his family, tracked the psychological progression across 31 missions against American bomber formations. Mission 1, August 17, 1943. First engagement with Americans. Expected easy victories as briefed. Found disciplined formation that maintained cohesion under attack. Shot down 1 bomber but lost 2 wingmen. Beginning to question intelligence estimates. Mission 5, August 24, 1943. Tactical approaches from training manual proving ineffective. Americans have countermeasures for every maneuver we attempt. Revised tactics with Stoffel based on combat experience rather than doctrine. Mission 9, September 6, 1943. New tactics also failing. They anticipate everything. It's as if they've wargamed every possible attack angle and developed optimal responses. Lost Mueller today, excellent pilot, 12 kills, flew straight into concentrated fire attempting a classic tail attack that works perfectly against Soviet bombers. Mission 12, September 15, 1943. We shot down 4 bombers today, lost 6 fighters. The exchange ratio is unsustainable. No one speaks of this openly, but every pilot understands the mathematics. We are winning tactical battles while losing the strategic war. Mission 18, October 8, 1943. Engaged formation of over 200 bombers. 200! Where did they come from? Intelligence said American production was limited. Intelligence was wrong about everything. Mission 23, October 20th, 1943. Lost Brandt today. He was my closest friend since training. 28 years old, wife and infant daughter in Dresden. Died when his attack was anticipated by tail gunner, who opened fire before Brandt reached optimal range. The Americans are learning our tactics as quickly as we adapt them. Mission 31, November 3, 1943. I no longer attack with confidence born of skill. I attack because it is my duty. Every engagement, I calculate survival probability. This is not the mindset they trained us into. We were taught to be aggressive, decisive, fearless. Now I am cautious, hesitant, afraid. The combat has changed me in ways I cannot explain to anyone who hasn't faced these formations. Mission 31, November 18, 1943. Watched a B-17 absorb hits from 4 fighters simultaneously. Saw pieces fly off. Watched engines catch fire. Yet it maintained formation, completed bomb run, and turned for home. Only on return journey did it finally fall from the sky. The crew's determination was, I have no words. We were told Americans lack fighting spirit. We were told they would break easily. Everything we were told was lies or wishful thinking. The truth is, we are fighting an enemy more competent, more determined, and far better equipped than our leaders will admit. The psychological toll extended beyond individual pilots to unit cohesion and morale. According to personnel records from the Reich Air Ministry, compiled by Allied intelligence analysts and published in the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, the average life expectancy of a Luftwaffe day fighter pilot dropped from approximately 30 combat missions in early 1943 to just 17 missions by year-end. Against American heavy bomber formations specifically, survival statistics were even grimmer. Dr. Mueller's medical reports from December 1943, preserved at the Deutsche Museum, documented the spreading psychological crisis. Combat stress cases have increased 340% since August. Pilots report recurring nightmares about walls of tracer fire, visions of disintegrating aircraft, auditory hallucinations of machine gun fire during non-combat situations. Most concerning, increasing number of pilots expressing certainty of impending death. This is not cowardice. These are experienced, decorated combat veterans. They have simply calculated the mathematics of repeated exposure to American formations and reached inevitable conclusions. They continue flying because they are soldiers, but they fly without hope. I fear this more than I fear physical casualties.
British Lieutenant Weber, whose letter home in April had expressed shock at American capabilities, wrote again in December 1943, his final letter before being killed in action on December 16th. This letter, intercepted by Allied intelligence and archived at the National Archives, represents perhaps the clearest articulation of the psychological transformation. Father, I write to you truths I cannot speak aloud among my comrades. We are losing this war. Not slowly, not gradually, but with mathematical certainty. The Americans have turned warfare into industrial production. They build bombers faster than we can destroy them. They train crews faster than we can kill them. Their formations improve with each mission while our tactics grow desperate. We were told we were the master race, that our spirit and skill would overcome any material disadvantage.
But spirit cannot overcome engineering. Skill cannot defeat mathematics. I have seen the future, Father, and it is a sky filled with American bombers that nothing we do can stop. I will continue to fight because I am a German officer and that is my duty. But I will not pretend we are winning. I will not lie to you as our leaders lie to us. If this letter reaches you, know that I died understanding the truth, even if I could not change it. The revelation was complete. Everything Luftwaffe pilots had been taught about American capability, from industrial capacity to tactical doctrine to fighting spirit, had been systematically proven false through brutal, repeated combat exposure. The psychological impact was profound. Veteran pilots who had entered combat against American bombers with confidence born of early war victories now flew each mission calculating their statistical likelihood of survival. But this was merely the beginning. The full scope of the psychological crisis, how pilots coped with forbidden knowledge their commanders refused to acknowledge, how the strain affected combat effectiveness, and what their experience revealed about the deeper strategic failure of the German war effort would only become clear as the air war intensified through 1944. What would happen when these men, carrying the weight of tactical truths the Reich could not admit, continued fighting a war the mathematics had already decided? How would they maintain their warrior identity while knowing each mission brought them closer to statistically inevitable death? And what would their experience reveal about the collision between ideology and industrial reality? February 20th, 1944. Hauptmann Klaus Hoffman sat in the ready room at Ansbach Airfield, watching younger pilots prepare for their first mission against American bombers. Their confidence reminded him of himself 6 months earlier, eager, certain, convinced that skill and courage would prevail. He said nothing. What could he say? That everything they believed was wrong? That their training had prepared them for a war that no longer existed? By early 1944, the psychological transformation that began with individual pilots had metastasized throughout the Jagdwaffe. According to Luftwaffe Personnel Command records captured in 1945 and archived at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, pilot retention rates had collapsed. Of pilots who survived 10 missions against American formations, 67% requested transfer to other duties. Of those who survived 20 missions, 89% showed symptoms of severe combat stress. The breaking point came not from a single catastrophic defeat, but from the relentless accumulation of mathematical reality. Major Fleischer's diary entry from March 12, 1944, preserved at the Imperial War Museum, captured this erosion. We shot down 11 bombers today. 11. By any previous standard, a magnificent victory. Yet tomorrow they will return with 40 more aircraft. We lost 8 pilots, 8 irreplaceable men with an average of 200 combat hours each. The Americans will replace their losses in 3 weeks with fresh crews from training schools we cannot bomb. The equation is elegant in its brutality. They trade material for our expertise until we have no expertise left to trade. The introduction of P-51 Mustang escort fighters in December 1943 accelerated the psychological collapse. Luftwaffe pilots who had grown accustomed to the mathematics of engaging bombers suddenly faced a new calculation. Fighters with performance superior to their Bf-109s, flown by increasingly experienced pilots, with range sufficient to escort bombers to any target in Germany. Lieutenant Otto Becker, Hoffman's wingman, described the new reality in his final combat report dated April 8, 1944, archived at the German Air Force Museum. Engaged American formation over Brunswick. Before reaching bomber stream, intercepted by P-51s. Lost 3 aircraft before firing a shot at bombers. The Americans have solved their final problem, protection of formations throughout mission profile. We can no longer choose when to engage. They dictate terms of combat. This represents complete air superiority. We are no longer hunters. We are prey.
But even more psychologically devastating than tactical defeat was the widening gap between official propaganda and lived reality. German radio continued broadcasting claims of devastating losses inflicted on American bomber forces, claims that bore no relationship to what pilots witnessed. According to intelligence summaries from the Reich Propaganda Ministry, captured in 1945 and archived at the Bundesarchiv, official announcements claimed 847 American bombers destroyed in March 1944 alone. Actual Luftwaffe kill claims, cross-referenced with American loss records, totaled 223 bombers, and even this figure was inflated by multiple claims on single aircraft.
Hoffman recorded in his sold book on April 15, 1944. Radio announced we destroyed 48 American bombers today. I was there. We shot down 12. 12 confirmed, possibly 3 more unconfirmed. Where do they get 48? Do they believe their own lies, or do they simply not care whether we believe? The gap between propaganda and reality has become so vast that believing anything command tells us requires willful self-deception. Yet we must maintain the fiction. Speaking truth is defeatism. Defeatism is treason. So we fly and we die and we pretend the lies are truth. The psychological pressure of fighting while knowing defeat was inevitable created fractures in unit cohesion. At Jagdgeschwader 26, tensions erupted in May 1944 when Lieutenant Hans Gruber refused to lead his swarm against an American formation, citing tactical impossibility of successful engagement. According to the court-martial transcript, preserved at the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv, Gruber stated, "I will not lead 3 young pilots to certain death for propaganda purposes. The mathematics are clear. We cannot win. Continuing to fight accomplishes nothing except adding our names to casualty lists." Dr. Mueller's medical reports from June 1944 documented the deepening crisis. Alcohol consumption among pilots has increased 340%. Sleep medication requests have tripled. 4 pilots in the past month have suffered complete psychological breaks requiring hospitalization. These are not weak men. These are decorated veterans who have simply reached the limit of human capacity to endure repeated exposure to near-certain death while maintaining the pretense of confidence. The human mind cannot sustain this contradiction indefinitely. Yet, even as psychological collapse spread, some pilots found meaning in continued resistance. Hoffman wrote in July 1944, "We fight not because we believe we can win. We fight because we are Germans, because our families are below those bombers, because abandoning duty is unthinkable regardless of outcome. This is perhaps nobler than fighting for victory, or perhaps it is simply the final delusion of doomed men. I no longer know." By August 1944, American bomber formations routinely numbered 1,000-plus aircraft. The 8th Air Force had grown from experimental raids of 20 bombers to industrial-scale operations that delivered 10,000 tons of bombs in single missions. Luftwaffe fighter units, depleted by casualties and fuel shortages, mounted increasingly desperate defenses with ever-diminishing resources. The final revelation came not through combat, but through simple observation. Lieutenant Becker, shot down and captured on September 11, 1944, described his experience in post-war testimony archived at the U.S. Air Force Academy. "After capture, American guards gave me coffee, real coffee and white bread with butter. They treated my injuries immediately. Their field hospital had medical supplies we hadn't seen in Germany for 2 years. The guard who processed me was friendly, almost apologetic about my circumstances. I realized then what we had known but not admitted. We were fighting a nation so wealthy, so industrially powerful, that they could afford to be generous even to enemies. This generosity, more than any tactical victory, proved we had lost." Hoffman survived the war, flying his final mission on April 21, 1945, 6 days before American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe River. His final sold book entry, dated April 20th, was discovered after his death in 1983 and donated to the Smithsonian. Tomorrow, I fly my 127th mission. I have survived what statistics said was impossible, but I have not survived unchanged. The confident young pilot who first engaged American bombers in September 1933 died months ago. What continues flying is a different man, older, wiser, and burdened with knowledge that victory was never possible. We fought mathematics with courage. Mathematics won. Perhaps there is honor in having fought despite knowing this truth. Or perhaps future historians will judge us fools for not recognizing inevitable defeat sooner. I no longer care about judgment. I care only that it ends. When the war ended on May 8, 1945, surviving Luftwaffe fighter pilots faced a reckoning with truth they knew but could not speak. The American bombers had terrified them not through cruelty or technological wizardry, but through the inexorable logic of industrial warfare. They had revealed that courage, skill, and determination could not overcome mathematical reality, that the warrior ethos of individual combat had become obsolete in an age of mass production and systematic doctrine. The 723 Luftwaffe fighter pilots who survived the war against American bombers carried psychological scars that statistics could not measure. They had learned that ideology could not defeat engineering, that propaganda could not overcome mathematics, and that fighting with honor did not guarantee victory or even meaning. Hoffman's final words, recorded in a 1982 interview preserved at the Imperial War Museum, summarized the experience. The Americans defeated us twice. First, through industrial superiority we could not match. Second, through exposing truths we could not admit. The second defeat was more complete. When your worldview collapses, when everything you believed proved false, you are left with nothing except the memory of having believed. That is the cruelest victory, not destroying your enemy's body, but revealing their entire understanding of reality was fiction. The Luftwaffe pilots never recovered from what they had learned in the skies over Germany. The revelation had been absolute, undeniable, and devastating. And it had been delivered not through propaganda, but through the simple, brutal mathematics of American industrial power translating into tactical reality, mission after mission, day after day, until truth could no longer be denied.